Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and our main topic today is the Abraham Accords. And yes, I know that we've discussed the Accords in the past, but it's now been one full year since the historic normalization agreements, the third ever such agreement between Israel and Arab states, were ratified on the White House lawn. First, former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, former President Donald Trump, and Foreign Ministers Al-Nahyan and Al-Zayani from the UAE and Bahrain, respectively, coming together and raising hope on September 15th, 2020. Then the accords later extending to include Morocco and Sudan, though Sudan has yet to fully ratify the agreements on their end. And no Sudanese rep was at attendance at the anniversary ceremony. But in any case, so far, in just the first year, relations seem to be at an exponential rise. And to celebrate, UN ambassadors from Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and the United States coming together in New York.
The United Nations Charter calls on countries to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors. That is exactly what Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan chose to do. A monumental, historic chance to mark a new chapter in our shared story, to change the way Jews and Arabs perceive each other, to promote mutually beneficial economic activity, and to face the larger challenges in the Middle East as a united front.
We anticipated the new investments, the academic partnerships, the joint research initiatives to advance renewable energy, water security, and public health. What we perhaps did not anticipate, and what we have been inspired, in fact, to witness, is how the creativity and the curiosity of our people truly ignited once these political impediments were removed.
In the past year, we've gone from ink on a page to concrete improvements between countries. Peace begets peace, and friendships begets relationships. And that is what we are here to commemorate and to honor today.
So how far have we come since the signing of the deal? And what can we expect to come next? Joining me to discuss is Israeli journalist, attorney, and author of Industry of Lies, Ben-Dror Yamini. Then we have expert on Arab world geopolitics with NYU and the Moshe Dayan Center, Dr. Joshua Krasna. And finally, president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, Dr. Efraim Inbar. Thank you all so much for being with us. Now let's start actually with the economic business dealings between the United Arab Emirates and Israel alone, now reaching $500 million at least in value despite the pandemic. Investments are in tourism, aviation, cybertech, fintech, and more. Is this below or roughly on track with the predictions? Dr. Krasna, I'll start with you.
So I don't know what the predictions were before the deal was signed. It's moving quite well. Two big deals which it's worth paying attention to is one, the Mubadala deal, where UAE company bought out Delec's share in the Israeli gas fields, which this just happened in recent days. And more interesting, and perhaps a little bit more challenging, the challenges in Israel to the deal signed between the United Arab Emirates and well, I'm trying to remember what it's called now in English, but the pipeline company, which is associated with a private company, to bring UAE or Emirati oil to Eilat and then ship it to Ashkelon for past Europe. So that has run into some problems which don't have, I think, anything to do with UAE-Israel relations. Everything else is moving quite nicely. One of the things that we do have to remember, of course, is that a lot of the rise in trade is actually more of, let's say, a whitening of dark trade in the past. A lot of these deals a lot of these companies had business in the past. A lot of business was going on in the past between UAE and Israel, but because of the lack of relations, it was being carried out between third parties. You'll notice that in recent years, the trade with Jordan has increased markedly. Israel's trade with Jordan, a lot of that was transit trade with countries that didn't have relations with Israel. So I think there's a tremendous jump forward, including, as we said, some very big deals. I think some of it is things that are really just uncovering things that existed in the past. But I think there definitely is a big push forward, and I think it would have been even higher in the past year if it wasn't, of course, for the Corona crisis.
Well, so Dr. Inbar, I want to turn to you now. Let's talk a little bit more about the defense and the security relations that we've formed. Ambassador Gilad Erdan suggests that in the future, these nations could form a regional alliance that shares intelligence, collaborates on defense, and even maybe shares Israeli defense systems like the Iron Dome. How far from reality is this goal?
Well, first of all, I think that Israel has always been careful in supplying weapons and weapon system to countries that are not really Western countries. And this is probably true also of the Emirates. We definitely share intelligence with UAE. Probably some hardware is going there. But I think to speak about the Iron Dome system being placed there so close to Iranian eyes is not in the cards for the time being. In addition, we have to be aware that this system is partly produced in the United States, and such transactions would probably require some kind of American permission. And since Americans consider using this system themselves, they may be reluctant in granting such a permission to Israel. But in the area of electronics and intelligence, I think there is plenty of cooperation, and probably the best cooperation is under the radar.
All right, so Ben Dror, thank you so much for your patience. I want to bring you in now. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, always an issue with these accords. All parties basically saying that they seek, all parties except for Israel really, saying that they seek to advance peace talks towards a two-state solution. But curiously, Ambassador Thomas Greenfield spoke on the issue the most. Bahrain, the UAE, Sudan, Morocco, etc., they're backing away. They're seemingly backing away from the issue. The ambassadors did not really mention the Palestinian issue. Are they putting it on a back burner, so to speak, or are they just maybe more focused on where there is a consensus?
It's very interesting because there is a very important survey of the Zogby institution, and that has been carried out immediately after the signing of the Abraham Accords. And what they found out, and it was quite amazing, and even Zogby himself wrote that he was astonished from the results, is that most people in the Arab world are supporting peace with Israel, or to be more accurate, normalization with Israel without any connection to the Palestinians. There is a huge change in the Arab and Muslim world. In many ways, it's because of the Palestinians themselves. They disappointed the Arab world again and again.
Yeah, is this like a donor fatigue? We're hearing words like donor fatigue being thrown around by even American officials.
Yeah,
is that...
No, they donated so much money for the Palestinians. They tried to help them in so many ways, and they were disappointed repeatedly. Look what happened 30 years ago with Saddam Hussein, and it happened again and again. And it happened even with something which is connected to the peace process. Let's not forget what bin Dar Ben Sultan, who was ambassador of Saudi Arabia in Washington, said. We did everything in order to bring them peace and two-state solution and independent state. We did everything. We supported the Clinton plan, for example, and we told them, go and say yes, and they went and said no. So yes, we are disappointed. That's what he explained. It's not my explanation. So this is part of the picture. Yes, the Arab world is disappointed. So as you know, formally they keep on saying, yes, we have to solve the Palestinian problem. Practically, I guess they do understand that there is not any solution for the moment, unfortunately.
Well, what about the idea of the Abraham Accords actually leading to a negotiated settlement with the Palestinian Authority? being that the idea being that the Palestinian Authority, like other Arab states in the region, would see the benefits of a peace with Israel. Both Ambassador Greenfield and Ambassador Erdan spoke on this.
And unfortunately, it's a wishful thinking. It's a wishful thinking because the Palestinians, I mean, this is their traditions, this is their ethos. I mean, they keep on with the conflict. They had so many opportunities in the last 20 years to achieve peace, to achieve independence, to achieve a Palestinian state. And they repeatedly said no. Why the Abraham Accords will change something, I don't know. I wish they would change their mind, but it doesn't look like if they are going to do it. Just look what happened 2 days ago. The foreign minister Yair Lapid put on the table something like, okay, economy for security, and the immediate response of both the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas was, no, we don't want it. I mean, what you don't want? You don't want prosperity. You don't want anything. You don't want welfare. The only one thing that you want is to keep on the struggle against Israel. It's very sad. It's very sad. But this is. But we have to look at the reality and not to delude ourselves with peace dreams.
All right. So Dr. Krasna, back to you. Saudi Arabia was a potential partner at the beginning of these agreements. Of course, we know now that they and Oman later said that they would wait to see some progress between Israel and the Palestinian Authority before signing on, like Bahrain and Sudan, Morocco did. But now we're discussing, as we just mentioned, that progress with the Palestinian Authority is likely a pipe dream for the near future. So has Israel hit a wall with the number of Arab states that might be willing to join with Israel and normalize with Israel?
Right. So I'll start by saying that I don't know who is expecting the Saudis to be part of this, but I certainly wasn't among them. The Saudis probably, right? The Saudis enabled the Bahrainis to move forward. The UAE, I think was updating them, but the UAE is not subject to what the Saudis tell them to do. The Saudis were never going to be in the first tier of the countries that either reached or renewed diplomatic relations with Israel. And I think for the second part of your question, I think to say we hit a wall is negative. I'd say we've collected the low-hanging fruit right in the beginning, right? UAE and Bahrain had very close relationships with Israel, which weren't formal. They had never had significant conflict with Israel. But Morocco came in because Morocco also was in that class, and also Morocco really wanted something from the United States they got. Sudan mostly was willing to do this because it needed things from the Americans, but Sudan is a country which has a leadership which is divided, and half the leadership, the civilian part of leadership, doesn't agree. After that, when you start looking at the list of Arab states, you understand how difficult it's going to be, because all of the states in the line after that have no particular interest right now in normalizing relations with Israel, whether it's the other Gulf states, whether it's the other Maghreb, the other Northern African states. So the ones who were probably closest to us in the beginning, or closest to the starting line, have passed the starting line. Sudan, theoretically, right, they heard the guns start and they started, but they haven't crossed the starting line yet. And the others, it's going to take quite some time. Some of them are enemies of Israel. Some of them are countries who see no benefit in normalizing relationship with Israel, and some of them are countries for whom the issue is really not important. And just circling back to Saudi Arabia isn't going to do it anytime soon because it doesn't give them much more than they already have, and the cost of them normalizing relations with Israel, both internally and in terms of their regional position, is higher than leaving it at a fairly good situation that it's in right now.
Well, so Dr. Inbar, more on this. Do you see maybe more states coming to the table, maybe even despite what Dr. Krasner just said, if the United States were willing to pony up a little bit more incentives as they did for the United Arab Emirates and for Morocco?
But this is exactly the big difference that between 2020 and 2021. We have a new president in the United States, which indicates, like his predecessor, that he wants to get out of the Middle East. And the Abraham Accords were largely a result of American resolve and American giving out
but the Biden
carrots to the
administration,
countries.
But the Biden administration, Ambassador Greenfield, they've all been pretty clear that they haven't discussed how they want to progress this, but they have been pretty clear that they do want to build on the Abraham Accords and to spread the normalizations.
Words are cheap. Of course, they want it. They want to have a good atmosphere all over the world. This is a typical liberal outlook. But in terms of what they can promise to additional countries, or they are willing to promise to additional countries in order to mend their fences with Israel, is a big difference. The Trump administration was fully invested in the Abraham Accords. All the weight of the United States as a superpower was behind the Abraham Accords, and all this is no longer existence. Not only that, we have Afghanistan debacle, which indicates to many that the United States is contracting its profile in the Middle East, is moving to maybe to the east, to China, and therefore I actually share the assessment of my colleague Dr. Joshua Krasnas that we probably will not see in the near future additional countries joining the trend that was started by the Abraham Accords.
All right, Ben Dror, I want to bring you in now again. I think a big question that a lot of people are asking, and I myself, the cynical portion of myself, is also asking this question: is it worth it? Because despite all the good that we have discussed, and there is a lot of progress and a lot of good that has resulted from these deals, many are very critical of the idea of normalizing with states like the United Arab Emirates, for example, where accusations of human rights, violations like pseudo-slave labor are rampant. Environmental groups, as Dr. Krasna mentioned earlier, are also protesting the trans-oil deal. And the list really goes on. Same thing with Bahrain, same thing with Sudan, who face accusations of systemic human rights abuses. Is it worth it to Israel's image, or otherwise, to follow through with these deals?
Well, you should ask that question, Iran, Germany and France and the United States and Britain and so many other countries that they have great relationship with all the countries that you mentioned. Why? Because we are dealing with interests. We are not dealing with values. We are not working according to the music of not of amnesty and not of HRW. We are not, and fairly so, I would say. Let me just tell you that from my very personal experience, not from the business world, but from the practical world. We have a lot of connections with journalists and academics from Morocco, from Bahrain, from UAE, and they are coming to Israel. We have Zoom meetings. Something is going on. Will it continue? I don't know. But a lot of activities are taking place. Jews are welcomed in Morocco. And it's very interesting. There are so many questions that I cannot answer. How comes that in Algeria it's the opposite, and anyone who is connected to Israelis is totally boycotted and so on? I don't know the answer. I'm trying to figure out how comes that we are welcomed in Morocco and in UAE and Bahrain, and we are not, totally not, in some other countries. Just to tell you about Saudi Arabia, yes, we are not going to have formal relationship, but there are so many bloggers that are officially connect to Israel on a daily basis, and they are writing to Israelis, and they put their names, if somebody doesn't know, they put their names in Hebrew. So something is going on in the Arab world. We have to be glad about. We are not going to achieve everything. We are not going to achieve women's rights not in one day and not in 2 days in Saudi Arabia. Does it mean that we are not going to continue with a formal or informal relationship? No, we are going to keep on, and rightly so.
All right, so briefly then, if you want to maybe add on that, Ben Dror, what do you expect as maybe the best and worst outcomes in the second year since the Abraham Accords were signed? Predictions for the future.
I would say that I want some universities in the West that are totally anti-Israelis to come to UAE and to come to Morocco and to learn something. I mean, how they welcome the Israelis. No, I mean it. I mean, there is a change in both places. For the bad in the United States universities, for the good in so many places in the Arab world. I don't want to paint it like if, oh, how great it is, but it is much better. The atmosphere that I'm accepted in the UAE is much better than what I am accepted in Berkeley and Princeton. This is a fact. I mean, something bad is going on in the United States. I guess all of us know it. I do hope that the atmosphere coming now from the Arab world will somehow reach out to the United States. The opposite as comparing to what we had just 20 years ago.
All right, Dr. Inbar, final word.
It's true that something is happening in the Arab world, which makes Israel more welcome. At the same time, we see other currents, in Arab societies, Islamization. So it's a struggle over the soul of the Arab world, and we don't know exactly how things will turn up. In any case, I think that, Ben-Dror Yemini exaggerated a little bit, and I wish our situation in the Arab world would be like in the United States. After all, 2/3 of the Americans support Israel.
I spoke
about Israel.
No, I spoke about universities. Yeah. I did not speak about the general public.
As an academic and living in a university for so many years, I can tell you that university is not the country.
Okay.
All right, well, I think we can all agree on that. Thank you so much, Ben-Dror Yemini, Dr. Josh Krasna, and Dr. Ephraim Inbar for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you. I'm Aaron Porras, and please tune in next time on Insider for more on everything Israel. If there's a topic that you'd like us to cover next, let us know about it in the comment sections online. And finally, for more news from Israel, follow ILTV on Facebook and on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and ILTV.tv channels. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.